that the fact that there are more and more elderly or older people in the world may offer, and whether the new takes that there are and the new possibilities that there are on old ideas of old age and intergenerational exchange are useful to what we can do in the present and in the future. And I think that the idea was that, first of all, you would be responding to each other's papers, and then we would open immediately to the floor once we've gone through your responses. So who would like to go first and maybe respond to a paper by someone else? Herr Kruse, wollen Sie anfangen?
Well, maybe I could start and ask a question about the last paper, and I mean this is also to the fellow panelists. What I'm interested in is the question whether the case of China is really different from other countries or not. I'm a sinologist, and I often in China and elsewhere get the comment that China is special. There's a Chinese way of treating elderly people and of dealing with all these problems, and I wonder whether from your perspective this is true or not.
Well, one of the things about China is, of course, that it's being influenced by the same neoliberal ideology that influences other countries. Particularly emanates from the United States, but also UK, perhaps a little bit less so in Germany. That's for you to judge. So the influence is to privatize where possible. And in that sense, it's the same issue in China as it is in many other countries. I know that in Nepal, for instance, which I didn't really talk about very much, they're worried there that there's too much emphasis on what they call BCAS, or development, but development in terms of privatization and private sector. So in that sense, I suppose China is not unique, but of course in terms of sheer numbers and the issues that Professor Chen mentioned, it's the scale of numbers that may be the key question. And so in that sense, China is sort of unique.
What we are highly interested in discussing on age and aging is what we describe or what we interpret as human plasticity. That means in how far we are able to shape actively developmental processes in old age. For example, from a physical point of view, but also from a psychological point of view. And of course, I can remember the demographic change which had been focused on in the European countries. We got a lot of charts focusing on the fact that we have in some sense a dramatic change in the number of old people or elderly, especially in the number of the very old. And I have always interpreted the figures as a challenge. Insofar as I had been interested in the fact that we should analyze the human plasticity theorem not only in the third age, but also in the fourth age. So it means, what about the rehabilitative potentials, for example, in patients suffering from stroke? Or what we are very interested in is, what about the rehabilitative potentials in patients suffering from different forms of dementia? That is, not only to be deeply impressed by the figures, not only be deeply impressed by the fact that we have, in some sense, a dramatic change in the very old people, but always to focus on the degree of human plasticity. That means, for example, what about the plasticity of our brain tissue? What about the plasticity of our cognitive system? What about the plasticity of our emotional system? That means resilience. In order to be able to shape in some sense the aging process. Because what we have learned in analyzing older people in very different situations had been that one of the most important or the most significant motives of older people is self-regulation. In how far I am able for self-regulation regarding the aging processes. The next one, are we able, for example, in the medicine or in the whole area of caring and nursing, are we able to offer rehabilitative programs in order to make older people able to live a self-responsible, independent life? And that is why I always address, for example, in the discussion with Kofi Annan, not only to be deeply impressed by the demographic change, but always to understand and to interpret the demographic change as a challenge for science and practice insofar we have to develop training programs, rehabilitative programs, medical programs, cultural programs in order to make older people able, or in order to support them to lead an independent, to lead a self-responsible life. And I think that is one of the real challenges, for example, of China or other countries, to interpret old age this way and to develop a medical, a caring, and a cultural and training system in order to support older people and to support the caregivers. And that is why I found it very important, for example, that you have addressed the topic of stereotypes, because it is very necessary to come to a totally different impression or image of old age. That means of an image which is good for developing, or which is good for encouraging us to develop very good intergenerationally based training programs, rehabilitative programs, motivating programs. I think that is very important.
One of the countries we looked at was Sweden, and this is a country where aging was first recognized in 1900, and interesting findings there, because despite many positives, including the fact that the oldest old, one of the worries is often that people will feel lonely. But certainly the samples that we looked at, the studies we looked at, people were saying, no, I'm not lonely, and I'm still reasonably mobile, which was an encouraging sign for those of us in other countries. But at the same time, Sweden still faced, especially in the care system, ageism. Ageism from younger people, younger nurses who were more likely to be male and had less experience of older people. So mixed messages, if you like. I think one of the issues we've got is that this is all happening so fast, and in a sense, none of us have had the experience of this, because although different countries have reasonably high levels, this is happening globally. It's a global phenomenon now. We're talking about, maybe 440 million old people across the globe now, and that number is set to go up further. So I don't necessarily have the answers, but I think it's very important, as you say, to address some of these psychological issues. I took out of retirement in order to do more research, paradoxically perhaps. But at times I feel lonely. But then I get on my email and I refuse to use Facebook, Twitter or Skype. But I could if I wanted. And of course more people are doing that sort of thing to keep in touch with their children and so on.
But I think what is very important and in some sense stimulating in theory and practice is you have addressed the topics that we have to develop new theories. For example, in gerontology, I agree totally with you. We have a lot of empirical data, but I think it is very necessary to have some form of anthropological and theoretical approach to age and aging. What I think is very important is, for example, also interpreting your data, very important data, that we bring together potentials of old age and aging, the potentials, and I think very often the potentials are in the cognitive, in the emotional, in the motivational systems, and the vulnerability. And very often our society, for example in Germany, is highly impressed of the fact that you are confronted with a high degree of vulnerability, for example, in a patient suffering from a stroke or dementia. What we are attempting very hard, that we will show it is possible that a patient suffering from dementia, or a patient from the early dementia, or a patient suffering from stroke can be able to cope effectively with this border situation and can show in this situation a remarkable psychological potential. And I think it is necessary to bring together those aspects, potentials, vulnerability, to bring together vulnerability on the one hand and the capacity of, and the human capacity to cope effectively with this border situation. I think that is very important. Very often I can find that we subdivide the phase of age in two phases, sub-phases. A phase of 60 years until 74 or 80, that is a phase of potentials. And the phase of 80 years and older, and that is a phase of vulnerability. And I think it is necessary to bring all those together, those aspects of human being, potentials, vulnerability. And I think that is in some sense challenging in anthropological and in theoretical terms.
Perhaps Professor Chen could also tell us a little bit, because you've been giving us all the numbers about sort of the experience of becoming elderly in China and how you see it. And maybe it can respond a little bit to what Professor Kruse was just saying about vulnerability and the possibilities of not just recognizing that.
Yes, thank you. I think for the whole world, the elderly people, they have some common things, but they also, because different country, their culture is different, and people, the psychology is also different. So for the elderly people, of course, because the age, their function, their body function, I think for the quality of life, it is a decrease. What means quality of life? I think there's three aspects. One is they can care their self-life. And also number two is because the people are society people, so they can communication with the people, something like that. Number third is work. For example, I'm already little more than 70 years old, but I like work because work make me happiness. And work make me, communication with the people. If I'm not work, stay home, I will depression. So I think the work can be for society, can be for family. The traditional Chinese parents, they help their children grow up, the grandchildren, they feel happiness. So I think the elderly people, they have common things, and they also have different culture, and different behavior, and different thinking, so all the things. So I think for the society, for the government policy, we need to support these healthy elderly society and make the people happiness. And I think that's all.
One of the very interesting points, I think, in China is the fact that with the one-child policy, first there was a fear that male children would be favored more. And in fact, it was like that, and we had more male children born, and an abnormal number of male children born to Chinese parents. And then, however, or recently, within the last 10 years or so, apparently, another challenge came in, that apparently male children don't take care of their parents so much. So this idea has changed, and we now have statistics that show very clearly that parents prefer a female child because that female child apparently takes care better of their parents. This is all, statistics, and whatever it means, people are very open to interpret that in one way or another. But I just want to throw this out as a sort of idea about how the fact that societies change demographically also means that their cultural values or their cultural ideas must always change as well. But I think, Hans, you wanted to say something, right?
I just wondered whether these statistics already show this. I've heard this for a very long time about China in the big cities, in Shanghai or Beijing. But
this was a countryside study, so
okay, but it was quite different in the countryside before. It's very interesting. Yeah, I wonder as we discuss this. All this is very nice, but there's one very important aspect that has not been discussed very much, and this is money. Elderly people, we can talk about psychological aspects, and that one can see positive sides and mobilize potentials of old people. But I think what is very necessary is to have the money to care for them and to somehow make this work. So we can talk about this in a system with well-functioning social systems, but it's difficult in other countries. And that I would ask Professor Chen, what do you think is going to happen in China? Will there be enough money to finance old people?
What do you use money? You mean money? It is government support.
It costs money to take care of old people, especially if you have less young ones.
Yeah, I think the China among these developing countries maybe we are suffering for the elderly, bigger number of percentage, and the need the society to support them. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we're facing this kind of economic burden. But I think this is a society responsibility, because they already contribute for the society. Of course, we need to afford them.
I would like to add a little bit, because I'm interested in the discussion, and I have had experiences in China when elderly people, aged 80 or so, talk to one and they say, well, I'm going to open a new business now. And this is something that would not really happen in Germany, I think. And I think it's simply because people know they don't have to do this. In China, and it's interesting to see that there's a lot of enthusiasm about this. So there's another aspect to the question I asked right now as well. There must be a motivation too.
There might be some variation by different societies, because of course one thing is, often pension funds have tremendous wealth, but one of the problems with pension funds is that most of us who have a pension and in a pension fund, we're not represented. We can't exert any influence over these funds because they just come to us, like manna from heaven or whatever, but we've contributed to them for years. So it may be that there's room for involving people more in, say, in the stock markets and pension funds is one aspect. I think one thing the state must do, though, is have a basic pension. Even if it is at a relatively low level, it can achieve a lot. As we saw in South Africa, where the people looking after their grandchildren, subsist on a very small state pension, but it is a state pension that enables that family to survive. So at the very least you need that. But you do also need, and China has it now, what's called a multi-pillar system of pension provision. And one of the best examples of that, I think, is in Sweden, where they have a two-pillar system. And each year, old people pensioners get an orange envelope, which details the basic money in their pension pot, and also the premium pot, which they have control over, and they can choose to invest in a particular way. So it encourages them to be active investors, and apparently many of them do move that pot around within certain parameters. So that seems, that sort of idea is becoming more widespread now.
I would open to the floor now, if there are no objections, and if there are any questions now from the floor, please raise them. Maybe stand up so we can see you, because the light is very difficult for us here. Any questions from the floor? No, not yet. Or everybody's hungry and just wants to start the reception. No, I'm sure. Yes, please stand up and please introduce yourself.
Yes. Mein Englisch ist nicht so perfekt, deswegen werde ich auf meine Muttersprache zurückgreifen. Ich bin Maria Theresia Marwig, 70 Jahre alt, und arbeite an einer psychosomatischen Klinik im Allgäu. Gleichzeitig habe ich vor einem Vierteljahr einen Kursus abgeschlossen und bin nun praktisch tätig für Sterbebegleitung. Und nun zu meiner Frage. Wir haben sowohl in den psychosomatischen Kliniken immer mehr alte Patienten, die mit Kriegstraumata zu uns kommen. Meine Frage nun, wie ist es in China, wo es ja auch viele Traumata gibt? Wie geht man da im Alter mit diesen Menschen um? Und eine zweite Frage, gibt es so etwas wie Sterbebegleitung? Und das wird ein großes, großes Gebiet werden, wenn nämlich zunehmend die Kriegsjahrgänge zum Sterben kommen und die vom Krieg traumatisierten Menschen.
Lausel, maybe I should translate also into English, or you couldn't understand the German, right? So this was a question about how people who've been traumatized, especially by war experience, but by other traumatic experiences as well, how when they grow into old age, how they are being helped in China, whether there's a system, because actually this lady works as someone who accompanies people who have been traumatized by war experiences. And so she's asking for a sort of parallel system in China, or a parallel service in China for people who have experienced trauma. Basically, I think the question is whether people who've had extreme experiences in their life, whether once they reach old age, whether there's a particular treatment for them in China so far. Maybe not, actually.
Yeah.
No. Maybe anybody else.
Not a specific.
No. So I guess maybe not yet. Maybe you should go to China to start this, because I'm sure it would help. And we have another question for Oliver.
Oliver Radke, head of the China program at Robert Bosch Foundation. Thanks so much for your input today. I have one question, because we are always interested in having an exchange between China and Germany. That's one of the ideas why you guys are all up on the panel. Can you give any concrete insights or suggestions on how China and Germany can cooperate in the field of addressing these issues of old age and aging? What can China learn from Germany? What can Germany learn from China? How can we cooperate and create joint projects between China and Germany to learn from the experiences and to not make any mistakes twice, to repeat stuff or waste resources or whatever, because we've heard about the money issue already and a lot of information available how to share and how to create joint projects between the two countries.
I think this is a very good idea, especially this time you invite me come over here. It is a good chance for me to learn from you. I think that China now is just still developing country, just the economic well growing. But you, as a German people, already economics growing. So I think maybe your current situation is China the future. So I think it is a good, wonderful idea. In the future, we can exchange and have a second forum together. And also, I think welcome all of you. If you come to China, come to Shanghai and let me know. And also, I think maybe we can have some kind of a research program to see how to give the government more policy suggestions and how to build the whole society more welfare system. So everything, I think the collaboration is very, very important to exchange our idea, to exchange our experience, to learn each other will help all of us.
Hello, I'm a student from China. I'm now studying Heidelberg, and I will spend 3 more semesters here. And I guess I've come today because my mother is going to retire in 3 years and in 5 years. And I've asked also this question to many of my German students here. I'm very curious about their relation between their parents and whether they will share responsibility like most of Chinese students. Actually, for me, I'm now really facing a problem that I'm living in China. I live with my parents and also with my grandparents because one of my grandparents is very sick. So my mother is the oldest child in the family, and she really loved to take care of her parents. And when I was very young, I really saw every day how my parents took care of their parents. And but now I'm studying in Germany, and I really see how my German students react to their family. It's like they really lead a very independent life, and some of them don't really travel back to home even in their winter vacation or summer vacation, but that's not unexpected in China. And their parents don't really even know what they do in the university and how many girlfriends or boyfriends they have, and it's like they really lead different life. But I also realize it's not bad because their parents have their own life, and that's perhaps a disadvantage of my parents because they do rely on their parents, and now they feel like their parents or also I am part of their life, and they do expect that I would do the same to them. But I really and then I told my mom, I'm sorry, perhaps I cannot treat you in the way you take care of your parents, but I can do something else, like mentally. Or I think my parents, luckily, they don't really need financial support from me, I guess. But later on, if it's very possible that I will work in another city, not my hometown where my parents live, perhaps I'll think about talk to them more. Or sometimes staying with the parents every day today, it's also not very nice. Living together will give more problems. Okay, now back to my question. I'm sorry. In Western, also in Germany or in other countries, do children take more responsibility to the old people or the government? And do you think it's the best way to put all the responsibility to government, or is there a middle way? Or could you just simply introduce me how also you to your parents, and whether you really only go back home during Christmas, or how often do you contact with your parents, and how important is this contact between parents and their children? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And
I have answered the question. Then later on, these other professor will that. I give you my own experience. I have two sons. They are twins, but they all abroad in U.S. So I said, I'm already old, but I still can take care of myself. But one day, maybe I cannot take care. Who can take care of me? So I think now elderly people, they need three things. One is their family take care. Two things is the community take care. The third thing is institutional, like 养老院, to take care. So I'm already look for some elderly institution can take care of me. So my two children ask me, do you want us to return back to take care of you? I said, no, it depends on yourself. So I have two words. One, if you return back, I'm very welcome. Number two, if you don't want to return back, it's okay. I have another way to take care of myself. So I think now, since the whole globalization, so young generation, they all can go to anywhere in the group, any countries. So as elderly people, they cannot require my children should take care of me. So we should depend on the society. Of course, if they like a back, I'm very welcome. But if they don't like, it is their life. This is my opinion.
I think some of it depends on the speed of aging. And obviously, it's very fast in China, but then China is increasingly connected to a global system now. And as we've already seen, some of the Confucian ideas were themselves stereotypical and not necessarily accurate. So the impression I have, I think, from a country like Sweden is that older people are increasingly not expecting their children to look after them. If anything, it's the other way around. And I know at the moment in Spain, with the crisis it's going through, it's older people that are keeping the middle-aged generation going, because the unemployment rate is about 20% plus. So there's a change, but in a country like Nepal, where the aging issue is only becoming dominant in the last 2 or 3 years, there is a problem, because the older people are feeling very neglected, because the youngsters are off to Kathmandu, the city, or they're off to the Middle East to work in Dubai and so on, Bahrain and other countries. So again, it goes back to partly it depends on the local situation as well as the global factors at work.
I think you have addressed a question which is also very important or very significant for understanding the intergenerational relationships in our country. Because we think that referring to the demographic change, our social security systems won't be longer able to finance totally the whole caring costs. And that means what we are discussing on is we should establish some form of caring community. And that means a community of shared responsibility. That means we have to bring into existence communities in which we have a close cooperation between the social security systems, respectively the medical doctors and the nurses on the one hand, the relatives or the family caregivers on the other hand, and third, volunteers. That means people who are able and who are willing to support families. And in our country, this system of caring communities, or the question how to establish caring communities, will gain more and more importance. That means we have to come to a new understanding of family. Family is not only the nuclear family, but family is also the extended family, being supported by neighbors, being supported by friends. For example, we have had a very intense discussion with our government what could be some forms of promoting caring communities from a legal perspective and from the perspective of social security systems. It is possible to support caring communities in order to make clear we have to come to some form of understanding of shared responsibility. And I think that is not only a political task, that is also a societal and a cultural task. What you have addressed is very important also for our country. Thank you so much for having the question.
If I could just... I totally agree with what Professor Cruz just said. I mean, the book I've just started is on, with others, is on sociability, social capital and community development, a public health perspective. And for example, locally in the Liverpool area, my wife was involved with the Reader organisation, which is a charity which seeks to get people together to read books publicly, in public, to each other. And one of the main drivers for that is the charity believes it will help reduce mental illness, problems with mental illness. There's another local activity, a community activity, which uses art for the same aims. And then there's a tradition in Liverpool, for instance, of community development anyway, which I've been involved with in the past and hope to be re-involved with in the future, where communities in some of the poorest areas of the country, never mind the northwest, have brought themselves together to work, to build their own houses. For instance, the Aldonian Cooperative, which a certain Franz Beckenbauer visited one time. You've heard of him? And one of the things they moved on to was helping with older people care as part of their community development. So in different countries there is this third way developing, but it does need funding, it needs support. It's not, people can do a certain amount for themselves, but they do need, if possible, it's often very little money, but it needs money to sustain itself. Volunteers need the money to get to places. They need the money for the equipment that's to be reproduced and so on, the leaflets, the posters and so on. It can't all be done by itself. Now, of course, we've also got this big society idea in the UK, but I think little society is better.
Thank you very much. We have to draw to a close because everybody's waiting for you to eat outside, and we have to rush off from the podium. But I think Hans von Ast should, if he wants, conclude with a few words.
I don't want to take too much. I mean, I would like to ask, I said in my talk briefly that already in the beginning of the 20th century, European visitors to China remarked that the burden on young people in China is heavier than in other parts of the world. Nevertheless, this is not going to change your personal situation, but nevertheless, I think that globalization will change China in this respect, and that as it is being done right now is most certainly not the future of China.
And I think on this note, with the future of China is one of the possibilities for us also maybe to learn. I would like to close this session of the Dialogue of Cultures, which began with youth. A year and a half ago, we had a round table discussion on youth, and now turn to age. And I think the intergenerational has been so important that we might want to ask the Bosch Foundation to sponsor another round table, which actually deals with the these questions of intergenerational activities and possibilities which have been so central to the discussion at the end. Thank you very much, everybody on the podium, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming and being part of this discussion, and I have a nice reception and have a nice evening. Thank you very much.